Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
Oh! Take him out! Take him out! Right there! Holy sh! Take this one.
When I left the military, it was pretty much hitting a brick wall when you get out of the military. I had no information on where to go. I had no information on who to look for. I had no information on any information at all but to be civilian.
In terms of veterans of all generations, veterans have twice the suicide risk than non-veterans. Nationally, it's a tragedy. 18 veterans a day commit suicide. We know that for current veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, on a national level, about 38% have some kind of mental health issue they're getting help for. 17% have a drug or alcohol issue. 11% have a traumatic brain injury.
Every returning guardsman here in New York State is going through mandatory screening for both post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury, the two what they call signature wounds of these wars.
We're able, because of our veteran status, veterans have a preferential status in this country. We have access to things that some people do not. And I think it's incumbent upon us as veterans to continue to fight for those rights for all people.
Welcome to another edition of Disability and the Law. I'm Marcel Cheney, and on behalf of the New York State Bar Association and the New York State Commission on Quality of Care and Advocacy for Persons with Disabilities, I'm pleased to host today's show, which features veterans and disabilities. The courage and sacrifice of veterans have rightfully placed them in the public eye. In America today, there are 24 million veterans, and of these, 3 million have disabilities. America, and indeed most societies, have greatly admired veterans. As we will hear and see in this show, the ramifications to veterans who experience disabilities are many. For most military servicemen and women, returning from war is a difficult adjustment period, and for veterans with disabilities, even more so. Fortunately for veterans and their families, they need not face these issues alone. Although the system is far from perfect, efforts are underway to assist with veterans and their families to not only cope with these challenges, but move well beyond to active and productive lives. Let's hear from Paul Tobin, the Executive Director of United Spinal Association, one of the premier veteran rights organizations, describes some of the rich history in providing services to veterans with disabilities.
United Spinal Association was born in 1947 as Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association, and essentially it was when a group of paralyzed veterans came back from the theaters of war in Europe and the Pacific, and they were housed, essentially warehoused, in hospitals run by the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, or its precursor. And paralyzed veterans had traditionally never been expected to survive because of infection and because of complications due to spinal cord injury. The advent of penicillin allowed people to start living with spinal cord injury, and so now the government was stuck with a new problem, and the members of Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association and later United Spinal Association came together to fight for the civil rights and independence of individuals with spinal cord injury and disorders. When veterans came back from World War II, they essentially were expected to die in hospitals. So there was no such thing as accessible housing. There was no such thing as having access to employment or housing or any of the other things that people took for granted. And they simply decided that it would not be acceptable to live out their remaining days in hospitals. And so they formed the organization and began fighting for the civil rights and independence of these individuals.
In today's show, we will briefly share with you the story of two veterans with disabilities. Although it is impossible to represent the experiences of all veterans with disabilities, We believe these two stories will provide you with a glimpse of what the experiences are like. Our first veteran is Walter Schmidt, a Vietnam-era veteran, and our second is Louis Duran, an Iraqi war veteran.
Well, I acquired a disability about 25 years after I left Vietnam. I was in Vietnam for 3 tours, October 67 to December 69. I was what was known as a PBR Brownwater River Rat. I was stationed down in the Mekong Delta, and I was there, as I say, for 3 tours. Even though I had certain problems prior to 1994, it wasn't until then that my body went into what we'll call a full body spasm as I was walking. I knew that it could have been related to something that happened in the service. I heard a little bit about Agent Orange, and I knew that they were illnesses that related to that, but I really didn't put 2 and 2 together until sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s. And to be honest, I don't really remember that moment where I was doing something online and I realized that the neurological damage that I was experiencing was potentially related to the exposure I had of Agent Orange over in Vietnam. There were many things about what was wrong with me that didn't fit the typical card. They knew it was some kind of a multiple sclerosis type illness, but I didn't have certain attributes that most multiple sclerosis patients have. I had an uncle who lost an arm in World War II, and he knew that I was entitled to some benefits, and he had constantly suggested we take you out to the VA, we take you out to the VA. Up until 2001 or 2, I was still able to walk with a couple of canes. I wound up in a wheelchair, a manual chair. At that time, my left side still worked. And he just finally kept on saying, get there, get there, get there. So I finally went out there. And what I found interesting was the person I saw initially at admissions reacted in a way that I didn't understand. They immediately shuttled me off to someone else who did a few tests and got me to another person, and I actually got assigned to my primary care physician in the VA in 1 day, at a time where it was 3 or 4 months normal wait. So didn't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that there was something unusual and that these people knew more about something that I didn't know, and that caused my curiosity to be aroused enough that I started looking into it.
Basically, I was out on the outskirts of Fallujah that fateful day of April 30th. I didn't think anything. I thought it was another routine patrol, and I was just pretty much focused on one side of the field. And we had a bunch of another squad of Marines searching houses and vehicles. And when I turned around, I didn't know that there was a pickup truck behind us. And from witnesses that told me that it was an Iraqi with a bandana across over his head and with some sort of Arabic scribbled over it, yelling at something. And I was probably about like 20, 25 feet away from the vehicle, and it exploded with such a tremendous impact that it actually threw me on the ground. I remember seeing the engine block of the car coming towards me, and luckily because of the force of the blast, I was actually knocked down, and that actually missed my head a couple inches. It pretty much destroyed one of our light armor vehicles. 5 Marines were wounded and 2 were killed. Basically, the 2 that were killed were exposed to the blast. The ones that were not exposed, they kind of survived. I survived with the least minor injury, which was actually shrapnel on my upper arm. My personal adjustment to PTSD, basically, it's been a hard road. I didn't have PTSD; would never existed. A term that was never in any military manual, and it was really hard to know what it was. And I just thought I was going crazy. You know, I didn't know that it was actually a reaction to what you've done and seen in a war or any traumatic experience. Because the reason why I didn't go for help in the military is because I did not have faith. I did not trust the military in keeping things secret from you. So if you go to the corpsman, which is another word for medic, if you go to the chaplain, I know from my unit, the commanders are going to want to know what's wrong with that person. So they're obligated to tell. It's not like the civilian world where there's a privacy act. There's no such thing as a privacy act in the military. And I can guarantee you, within a day or two, your information that you have, you're going haywire, or you have some sort of mental impairment, it's going to spread like wildfire in your battalion, and people will look down upon you, and they will make you seem weak. And to avoid that, I avoid that at all costs. I don't care who or what I heard or whatever. I will keep that a secret from them at that time when I was there. So basically, that's like a holy shrine. Don't tell anybody. Shut up and just basically keep on moving forward into your end of enlistment.
In an ideal world, would veterans with disabilities return, they would be provided the information they need to gain access to services to which they're rightfully entitled. Many within the veteran service communities in the public and private sector are actively striving to reach out to veterans with disabilities and to help them identify and negotiate the often confusing array of services.
The most effective way for an individual, for a veteran to learn of their benefits is to work through a veteran service organization like United Spinal Association or Vets First. The VA is a tremendous bureaucracy. There are a lot of ins and outs. There are tricks, if you will, on obtaining those benefits. And trained veteran service organizations and national service officers who work for those organizations are trained in identifying the appropriate benefits and preparing, presenting, and prosecuting claims with the Department of Veterans Affairs to seek out and obtain those benefits. United Spinal Association, for instance, has reclaimed on the order of more than $200 million worth of benefits over the years on behalf of our members. That's a combination of monetary benefits, monthly compensation, as well as things like home modifications and structural alterations. United Spinal Association gets involved right from the very beginning. Our hope is that we will be introduced to veterans either while they're still in the Department of Defense, before they actually have achieved veteran status, and that we can work with them to make sure that the Department of Veterans Affairs is providing the full range of benefits that they're eligible for. So we hope to be introduced right from the very beginning, either through friends, family members, or through the service itself. The disabilities, for veterans with disabilities, there are a wide range of benefits that are available, from education to housing to automotive and adaptive equipment, as well as compensation and pension benefits. From the beginning, what we hope to do is to have compensation benefits afforded to the individual based upon their degree of disability as adjudicated by the Department of Veterans Affairs, so that they have some financial security after their military service.
I will tell you that since these wars began, I think the country has been in a tailspin trying to accommodate the needs of returning veterans and their families with disabilities, because the other piece of this is the caregiver or the support structure that exists alongside of our service members, our veterans with disabilities. It gets better every day. But if you're a veteran of these wars who was injured, wounded while in Iraq in 2003, the level of care you received is markedly different than the veterans separating from the same location in 2008 and 2009. It's very, very challenging for individuals with disabilities to separate from service, number one. Number two, but to do so with disability and try and find work is even more challenging. So their needs are special. And you're finding that disability is really into two categories. There are those with physical wounds of war, and there are those with invisible wounds of war, stress disorder, mental health concerns, and things like that. And I think this is a message that a lot of people need to understand, is that accommodation, not handout, but just the extension of a hand in supportive services is very critical to helping those who want to succeed. These folks are coming out of service wanting to succeed. They want to get on with their life. They want to overcome their disability as best they can and rejoin life as they left it.
About 5 years ago, the Brain Injury Association of New York State received funding to work in identifying the needs of service members and veterans who sustain brain injuries in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. The first thing that the service members and the veterans need is to be screened to identify whether or not they may have sustained a brain injury. And again, that's relatively new. Only the past maybe 3 or 4 years, has there been consistent screening around brain injury. I think the identification has certainly improved greatly and will continue to improve, and I think that that's very good. I think the next step is a commitment that certainly many agencies and individuals have been pushing, that the military, that the VA and the active duty military respond with some acknowledgement and with services, recognition and services. And I think certainly as we travel around New York State working with a whole range of military partners, we're seeing a change even in the past few years where there's much greater recognition of the existence of brain injury. You may have a person who had one personality before the injury and now has a different personality, which may be positive or negative, but different. And how do you adjust to a different person? This is not the same person I had before. And we hear that over and over again from parents, from children, from spouses. This is not the person who went to Iraq or Afghanistan. This is not the person I knew before, and how do I adjust to that? And there's a tremendous amount that goes on around that. And for the individual, him or herself, there's an incredible process of, again, depending on the severity, the supports, all of those kinds of things, but it may be on adjusting to either having lost a sense of self, particularly if you have a soldier who can't go back to his or her unit. That's a devastating loss to that individual's sense of who he or she is and what they're about. Or it may be a change. It may be a change in the family. Sometimes the families fall apart around that, and tremendous amount of needs that are on the, some of them are on the physical level, financial level, and some are on very personal, interpersonal level that can be very, very challenging.
Returning veterans, and particularly those with newly acquired disabilities, have a much different experience than previously returning veterans. Today's veterans are in many ways a different kind of soldier, and their experiences are severely impacted not only by themselves, but ever increasingly on their families and loved ones.
The burden borne by family today is unequal to any other time, I think, in our nation's history when it comes to our armed forces. What you're finding is, because 3 of every 4 of us in the United States Army was married, is that it's very tough for us to deploy, come home and get ready to deploy. And unfortunately, the responsibility lies a lot within that family unit for bearing the burden of preparing for war, being at war, and coming home from war. What's different about this generation is that we don't rely upon a veterans service organization to communicate my broad needs to this country. This generation is very equipped at communicating their own need, and they will do so because I think they've served with pride. They want to get on with their life. They want to go forward in a very prideful manner, and they want to deal with their disability.
Yeah, it's tremendous stress on the families, particularly in a sense of people being in the Guard reserves where they have this constant deployment, redeployment, where they are, you know, one day they're in their civilian job with their family, then they're away for a year, they come back into the family and things have changed. Our children have grown, things have changed at home. They get used to that again, being home, and they're deployed again. And so this constant deployment, redeployment, high divorce rates are a result of this. And also they're now seeing health effects on children. Children with parents that are deployed are showing higher blood pressures and higher rate of stress than their civilian counterparts. I think it's actually getting better. I know in the Vietnam era it was certainly horrible. but I think people now are more accepting of it. They're more understanding of it. We're able to get through also using the computers and the internet to kind of get the word out there. And I think there is a lot of support for veterans, in our society today in terms of the Alliance. We're bringing together various kinds of people, universities, elected officials, mental health providers, private citizens are now stepping forward. This weekend we had a family, and I was involved with this. We did a parachute jump to raise money for veteran services. So people really are kind of coming together to rally around this cause.
I actually met Louis in high school. I was a sophomore and he was a senior. And basically I knew more about him than he did about me. And then after that, he graduated, went off into the Marines, served for 4 years, and I lost contact with him during that period, so I really didn't know where he was at. But then in 2007, we met again, and that's when, we started our relationship. He was very isolated, he was very closed, stayed at home, he didn't really go out, he didn't talk to many people or have many friends. So when I first met up with him, I noticed that there was, a very different change in him. He was very, quiet and to himself. So I looked into, his disorder and what he had, PTSD, and I saw that, there was many things I could do to help him out. So socially, I tried many things to get him out of his little, bubble that he was in and being isolated. So we used to go out more often, have little like coffee breaks and coffee dates, just so he would, be out more often and not be so isolated. You have to be very patient in times when they're like very detached and stuff. That's when you most have to be there for them and be like, what's wrong? Is everything all right? It deals with a lot of detachment and having like, a lot of emotions and anxiety. So it's just a lot of patience and time that you have to put into it.
Patience and time is indeed a good beginning for all of us. In a post-9/11 world, it is important for all of us to assist in the reintegration of veterans with disabilities. It is no longer acceptable for us to shuttle veterans into institutions for care. They're returning to their homes, where through assistive technology and support services, they are pursuing employment and higher education opportunities. By so doing, their lasting contribution to society may not only be their truly heroic deeds in protecting our freedoms, but also their social impact on the acceptance of persons with disabilities in American society. Thank you for watching Disability and the Law.
Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.